Hello my bookworms, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. My name is Sydney, and in today's video we're going to be chatting about basically favorite books. So many books fall under this category, but these 10 books specifically I have chosen because I think that as a whole they represent who I am, my reading tastes, and ultimately will not only give you a glimpse as who I am as a reader, but who I am at the soul. So hey, what's up? How are you? I hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for being here and hanging out with me for a little bit. Intro might have been a little bit dramatic, but it's truly kind of how I feel about these picks. We might get a little personal. We might get pretty oddly specific as to why I chose the books that I chose. But regardless, I have a lot of beautiful books surrounding me. Not just here, but in front. You can't see them. You're almost sitting on them right now. These are the books we're going to chat about. Some of these titles will be of no surprise to many of you, but I can guarantee you that there's going to be a couple books on this list that you will not see coming. Mark my words. But with that being said, let's jump right on in with a series that you're expecting. All right, let's just get it out of the way. And that series, it has taken over my entire mental scape. It has taken over how I read fantasy books. Truly, I feel like going forth in fantasy series, this is the benchmark. The series in question, can you guess? It is The Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne. Are you surprised? You shouldn't be. This chunk of a series truly might be my favorite of all time. If it's not, it's definitely going to be in my top 5 forever. The reason that I chose this series in particular, I'm not gonna hold these the whole time. You cannot expect me to do that. So I'll hold up the first book in the series, which is Malice by John Gwynne. All right, here we go. The reason that I chose this series in particular to represent me, to tell you about myself. I grew up playing a ton of different sports, but in my free time, I was reading and playing Xbox, all right? And on Xbox, Skyrim was my favorite game. And I know I've said it 100 times already on my channel, but bear with me for one more time. Reading this book as an adult and loving Skyrim as a kid, it feels so cozy. It is exactly what I would want in a high fantasy story. The series is about a prophesized god war across the realm of the Banished Lands. There's a huge cast of characters that we're following, and the thing that this story does so well is, one, make you fall absolutely in love with the characters. Truly, these characters are now my family. I feel so deeply. The war and politics that go on within this plotline, which the plotline in and of itself is a whole thing. Obviously, with all of the characters, there's so many different storylines. It gets very, very intricate. Mentioning that there is a lot of war and battle within the series, it gets very violent, but that also plays to the fact that I'm a neurotrauma ICU nurse, so I see some pretty gnarly shit, so it doesn't bother me. The gore and the violence doesn't bother me, but that is something to take note of. All in all, I truly believe that this series was written for me, and even though it is so long, I wouldn't even be surprised if I reread it all at some point. I gave every single book in this series either a 4.5 or a 5 stars, and it was incredible. What a time to be alive. The next book, let's stay in the same vein as video games and talk about Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This, of course, is on my list. Not only was Skyrim one of my obsessions as a kid, but so was RuneScape. And if you've been around on my channel, you know I've talked about RuneScape quite a few times, even did a TBR based off of me walking around in the RuneScape world. And this book kind of took me back to enjoying the old school way of playing games online. Having that sort of nostalgia for it mixed with the actual plotline, which is immersed in these deep, complicated feelings that come with literary fiction. This is one of those books for me that I remember very vividly listening to it while I was painting the stairs in our new house. And I remember it specifically because it was during one of the times of the story where we were actually getting some in-game play, which that in and of itself was very nostalgic for RuneScape for me. But I remember very vividly pausing the audiobook while painting the stairs, standing up and thinking, wow, this is so fun. I love this book. And then I sit and think deeper about all of the discussions and all of the different complicated feelings that are in this story. And Gabrielle Zevin just really did that. She did a great job. Our two main characters in this story were friends by a certain circumstance when they were children, and then they grew up and found each other again and decided to ultimately create this video game together. It blew up and they got really famous for it. So it's following that situation and them creating a new video game together and the messiness of their separate lives. It talks about chronic illness. It talks about platonic friendships, but also not really because they are often in love, but never actually lovers. It talks about women in the gaming industry. It just does so many things so well, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I own 3 copies. The next book on this list is, of course, Betrayed by Emily Henry. I remember when I first started my channel, I remember specifically saying that I am not a romance reader and and I'm not really interested in romance books. But for whatever reason, maybe it was the hype surrounding this book when it came out, or maybe it was just the beautiful cover, but this was the book that first sort of made me think, maybe I will try out a romance book. And obviously I did. This was the first romance that I read as an adult, and it obviously had a huge impact on me, right? It's on this list. I am absolutely head over heels in love with this book. This book not only opened up the genre of romance for me, but it showed me how great this genre actually is. So obviously it holds a special place in my heart. It is hilarious. Emily Henry is known for her banter. She never disappoints. It's sexy. It's culty because our two main characters go and interview cults for one of their respective books that they're writing, because our two main characters are both authors staying at neighboring beach houses, but they're both having writer's block, so they decide to swap genres and write a new story. He writes literary fiction and she writes best-selling romance, and for one of his stories, he was interviewing people who lived in cults. So that is part of the story. They go and interview someone who was in a cult. And in January's life, the female main character, her dad has just passed away. The relationship with her dad was strained because he had cheated on her mother. So there's a lot of complicated feelings going on. But when I tell you, towards the end of the book, there is some situation that happens with her father that had me absolutely like sobbing, like crying to the point that I remember setting the book down and just like laugh crying, saying, oh my God, because I couldn't even handle that I was feeling as much as I was for this story. And I will just always love it and see it as a key book in my reading journey. Talking about key books in my reading journey, let's go on to one that you probably won't be surprised at seeing if you've been here for a while, and that's Bunny by Mona Awad. This book is to date one of the weirdest, strangest books that I've ever read. And again, this is a book that pivoted my reading experiences, made me realize how much I absolutely love strange, fever dream-esque type books. This story centers around our main character Samantha, who is in her MFA program, and the other people in her writing cohort are three girls that are basically in this little like cliquey, culty thing, and they call each other bunnies. Ultimately, Samantha gets invited to the bunnies after hours ritualistic workshops where they conjure these like monstrous creations and the literal edges of reality start to blur. This was another book that I would just sit back and start laughing because I couldn't even comprehend where the story was going, what was actually happening in these moments, because it was absolutely bizarre and I couldn't believe what I was reading. I loved what I was reading, and if anything, this book just solidifies this trajectory of my reading style where I just love the weird and the strange. The next book is a booktube classic, one that obviously I hold very near and dear to my heart. It is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This was one of those books for me, and I know I've said it since I've read this book, but I remember reading this and thinking in my mind very vividly, wow, I will never read a book that I love more than this one. It has everything that I love. Extremely lyrical, beautiful poetic writing with a touch of pretentiousness. I know people think that this book is a little bit pretentious. I mean, for God's sake, the beginning of most chapters starts with the main character's full name, Zachary Ezra Rollins. It's like a little bit pretentious, but I love it. It is so magical. It is not only magical, but it's so atmospheric because the writing is so beautiful and lyrical. There is even a big portion of the book where things get a little blurry, like takes a step onto like the weird and strange side where I don't really know what's happening, but I am here for the vibes. In this story, we follow our main character, Zachary Ezra Rollins, who finds a book in his university library that sends him on a quest like no other. It contains the impossible, a recollection of his own childhood. I have to say that the actual synopsis of this story is one of my favorites ever, so I'm just gonna read it to you, okay? It says, determined to solve the puzzle of the book, Zachary follows the clues he finds on the cover, a bee, a key, and a sword. They guide him to a masquerade ball, to a dangerous secret club, and finally through a magical doorway created by the fierce and mysterious Mirabelle. This door leads to a subterranean labyrinth filled with stories, hidden far beneath the surface of the earth. When the labyrinth is threatened, Zachary must race with Mirabelle and Daryan, a handsome barefoot man with shifting alliances, through its twisting tunnels and crowded ballrooms, searching for the end of his story. You are invited to join Zachary on the Starless Sea, the home of the storytellers, story lovers, and those who will protect our stories at all costs. Like, why does it make me emotional? I don't know. I literally love this book so much. When I think of this book, not only do I think of obviously all of the beautiful writing and the amazing storyline, I specifically think about how I felt in one specific scene when they're finally like in or on the Starless Sea. And the idea of the sea, the ocean, scares me. Like you will never catch me on a cruise, all right? Period. You will not. So the idea of the starless sea on the surface is like scary, but the way that it's written is the most cozy and comforting thing. I don't know if I can like adequately tell you how the ending and the conclusion of the story made me actually feel, but it like, yes, made me feel very small and insignificant to something as vast as the ocean, but in a way that was so cozy. It was one of those scenes where I like mentally live there quite often. I can picture and feel what our main character was feeling and experiencing. I think of it quite often. And for that, and because of the beautiful lyric poetic writing, which is my absolute favorite thing ever, this is absolutely on this list. The next book on this list, so that you can get to know me a little bit deeper, is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Keyla Emezi. If you've been here before, you know that they are an auto-buy author for me. And this book, I was very worried about reading. For whatever reason, I just didn't really think that I would like it. Mostly because I've never read an age gap romance before. I didn't really know what I'd be getting into. But one, wow, romance was absolutely phenomenal. Loved that part of the story. But what really makes this book part of me is how vividly and perfectly Keyla Emezi captured grief in this story. Our main character lost her husband in a tragic accident, and she is an artist, and she is putting together this piece that is surrounding that heavy, all-encompassing, drowning grief that she feels. And throughout the story, she's struggling with, feeling love again, while also coming to terms with grief and what she's feeling about everything. I have never read a story that talks about that emotion so perfectly. I told you that we were going to get a little bit deep, a little bit close. I feel like grief in this very specific situation of losing someone very close to you that you loved, that you had a future with, is very specific. And even if you're happy and things have moved on, because life just goes on, that is another thing. It's just like, it's crazy that even though something so tragic happens, life goes on, but grief will hold you in the past and you have to work through it and so on and so forth. This book is that. Never have I felt so seen and validated in that kind of realm of emotion than I have when I read this book. I sobbed. Sobbed! And it will always be a book and a story that I cherish. Let's do a little mood switch, shall we? This next book that I'm choosing is Camp by Elsie Rosen. I read this so long ago, in fact, that I was using paper tabs. I didn't even own like the tabs that I use, and is still on my list of favorite books. This is a young adult book about a summer camp for queer teens, and our two main characters, Randy and Hudson, have gone to the same summer camp for a couple years, and Randy has always been like infatuated with Hudson. But the thing is that Hudson is a masculine guy who is attracted to the masculine type guys, and Randy is typically considered not masculine in this sense. So in the story, Randy changes his whole look for this year of summer camp and tries to be more masculine, and Hudson notices him. They get together, they start, the little summer camp romance. And obviously the life lessons in this story for Randy about how, if you change everything about yourself, does that person actually love you, or do they just love what they think you are? That whole sort of situation. It's phenomenal. But also the vibes of summer camp in this book are just phenomenal. I grew up going to summer camp. This is why I love this book so much, because that was such a big part of my childhood growing up, was going to this very specific summer camp. And there are so many instances within the story that I can just remember. It just literally puts me back in that time. Even the mundane things like waking up and walking outside of the cabin with there's still fog in the air, you could smell the dewdrops, all the way to like the little excursions and trips and activities that they go and do. It's just perfect summer camp vibes, and it brought me back. The next one is one that might surprise you. I don't know if any of you would guess that I would choose this book, but wow, I love this book. It's Night Bitch by Rachel Yoder. This book is actually really important to me for so many reasons. It's about this mother who puts her ambitious art career on hold to stay at home and raise her son, but only the experience of doing so is not matching her imagination or her ambitions for her life, basically. And one day she feels this tuft of fur on the back of her neck, and she quite literally thinks that she is turning into a dog. And it becomes harder and harder for her to kind of separate the two personas that she's getting, like where she's actually a literal dog and one where she's raising her son. She's kind of mixing the two. It's one of those like satirical stories where you're not really sure what is actually true, what is actually going on, and it is an absolute joy to read. The topics that it talks about are things that I think about, because one of the discussions around having kids that terrifies me is that people lose who they are when they have a kid. Their whole like identity becomes around being a mom and taking care of their child, which is great. If that is what you want for your life, then absolutely, to each their own. But the idea of losing everything that I love doing, or not everything, but some things that I have to give up in order to sacrifice my time to spend caring for another, like, yes, it's a beautiful thing, but also it's a terrifying thing. And this book talks about that, how this mom puts aside her art career to do this, to raise her kid. And as she goes on, she realizes what has happened, which is that she's losing part of herself. She's losing her artistic side. And it sort of morphs into this like crazy story about becoming a dog. And ultimately she begins creating art again, but in a different way. And I read this on Kindle and I just recently got a physical copy, which I was very excited about. So I think around the last 75 pages or so, give or take, were absolutely wild. And we see by the end of the story what her art has become. And it was so beautiful, very atmospheric, very strange. Absolutely love it. Strange is a word that you hear often in my reading tastes. Okay. All right, the last two might not be a surprise for you, okay? I've talked about this one in particular. Well, I've talked about both of these quite a bit on my channel. This one I have chatted about recently, and it is Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. Caleb and I actually had passages from this book read at our wedding, and if you want to see little glimpses of our big day and hear one of the passages read aloud, you should check out the link that I put down below for my spring book recs video, because I also show you parts of our wedding video, and it is absolutely stunning, and I sob every time. This book holds such a special place in my heart for so many reasons. Now even more so because parts were read at our wedding, but this book represents like complicated and very simple times. This is a collection of letters that Rilke wrote to a young man who was writing to him for advice on not only poetry, but just life in general. It has so many great takeaways. So many people have actually messaged me and told me that they read this book because of me, and it meant a lot to them, so on and so forth. Like, that is getting any sort of message that someone read a book because you recommended it and they loved it. Like, that is the best feeling ever, truly, because it really is a phenomenal book. And I just mentioned that this book sort of represents difficult times, but also very simple times. So I needed this book when I was a kid. Poetry was a form of therapy for me. I wrote poetry all the time when I was a teenager. I had a very specific book. I had a very specific pen that I used. If I couldn't find the pen, all hell would break loose. I still have that pen to this day. And I say that poetry was a form of therapy for me because I struggled a lot with self-harm when I was growing up. And the beautiful words and advice from Rilke in this story are just so wholesome and wise, and I truly think that every single person who reads this will take something away from it. Those are the hard times that this book reminds me of, but it also reminds me of very simple times. This was the first book that Caleb recommended to me when we first started dating. I remember getting my own copy and reading it in a hammock along the little river canal here in Indy. I would visit Caleb at work at the coffee shop, get a coffee, and then longboard to my little hammock spot and read this book. That is such a simple time. Being able to have the time to do that in particular is just such a great memory to have with this story. And I think that it retroactively shaped things or helped me think differently about things when I was little now, as well as giving me a lot to take away from it looking forward. I hope that makes sense. The last book that I wanted to add to this list for you to get to know me, I had to put this book on this list. Wasn't really an option. It is, and you shouldn't be surprised, Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. This is one of the few books that I have reread as an adult. Like, I typically have not been one to reread anything because there are so many other books that I want to read that, like, why would I spend time rereading a book? One where I already know that what's gonna happen. This is the exception. Like, I would keep rereading this book. It has everything, all right? It has romance, slow burn, which I love, strong female lead who doesn't give a shit and will kick ass and take names, murder, mystery, magic, the three M's, murder, mystery, and magic. And I don't really have anything like highbrow or intelligent to say about this story, other than I just freaking love it, all right? I just love this book, and I will take no criticisms. Thank you, and good night. I have a little bonus one for you. This one will be sort of quick, though. It is The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. I love this book so much that I surrounded my shoulder tattoo off of the themes, basically. This is a feminist witchy story, and the atmosphere in it is phenomenal. Truly, just whenever I see this cover, I get happy. I feel cozy. I feel the atmosphere and the magic exuding from it. I don't know. I love it. I always recommend reading this book in the fall. If you are somewhere where the leaves change color, read this in that time. I'm telling you, it'll be so good. And I can show you the tattoo itself. It is just a beautiful, magical, witchy woman. Just look at her. She's so stunning. With a crow, obviously. She's my favorite. I love her a lot. But that's it. I really hope that I like made sense in this video and had some coherent recommendations and descriptions as to why all these books mean something so special and so specific to me. But yeah, so that's it. Thank you guys so much for being here and hanging out with me for a little bit. If you are still watching, then leave the crow emoji down below in the comments and don't forget to subscribe and like the video. I always appreciate your support. And of course, be kind to one another and happy reading. Bye.